Oh yeah, me too a little bit. Yeah, I know.
Waar is je liedje? Dat gaat niet weg.
Not two, okay.
No, it's no.
What time is it?
We can start at 2, but we have to wait for 2. Huh?
Okay, fine.
Yeah, it's 4 minutes to 2.
7 minutes.
I think it's 1 minute after.
Tom, is it 2 o'clock?
1 minute. I give you a sign and it's 2
When it's 2
o'clock,
o'clock.
okay?
Hello, thanks for coming. I'm just going to explain a little bit about the project that I made here, The Believers, and then going to play a few of the films, and then...
Come a little closer to the mic, yes?
What?
Come a little
Yeah?
bit closer to the
Okay.
mic.
Sorry, so and then I'm just going to explain a bit about the films, then play 4 of them. There are 12 in total, and then after you've seen 4 films, you're welcome to ask any questions if you have any. Anyway, just before I start the films, there's a filmmaker, an Australian filmmaker called Dennis O'Rourke, and he made a work called Cannibal Tours, which I like very much indeed. And it's there's a part in it, and it's examining how visits by American tourists affect a small community in Papua New Guinea who used to be cannibals. And there's a bit in it which I thought was amazing. And there's a local man, a native, and he makes his money by selling souvenirs to tourists who come off the ships. And obviously, when the tourists are on the ships, the people say to them, look, when you're speaking to the native people, don't pay the first price that they ask for their souvenir. He says you have to say, no, that's too much. You have to say, no, that's too much. You have to ask for the best price. And anyway, then Dennis O'Rourke, the filmmaker, he's observing this interaction between this native who's selling these souvenirs and this American tourist who's got off the boat that's visiting the island. And anyway, the native is saying, yeah, well, it's 3, whatever it is. And the tourist, like he's been told by the people on the ship, he says, no, that's too much. I want the best price. And so the native says, well, it's 3 things. And he says, no, I want the best price. And he's smiling. The American is smiling because he's enjoying negotiating with this native. And now the native knows that he has to sell the object to this man because nobody else comes to visit. These people come. So he says, all right, well, you can have it for 2. And then he goes, no, I want the best price. So he says, all right, have it for 1. And then he gives the American tourist that. And then the American tourist goes away. And then the native man says to the camera, to Dennis O'Rourke, he says, why do they do this? He says they're rich people, but that they want me to give them something for absolutely nothing. Now, what I liked about this a lot was that Dennis O'Rourke, the filmmaker, he doesn't make a judgment. He doesn't say this is good or this is bad or this is right or this is wrong. He just observes the interaction between these two people. And for me, I thought that in that little interaction between these two people, it said everything about what's wrong with the capitalist system and how exploitation in the system is inherent and how that leads to conflict and bitterness and anger. Because the native man was furious that he was being cheated by this man who had the power to pay for something. Anyway, what I liked about that was that the small, intimate relationship between these two people, which represented lots of really big things. Anyway, that was in my mind when I began making these films, The Believers. Basically, the films, there are 12 films in total, and they're about people who believe they have the one truth. But the 12 different people believe 12 different truths. Now, the films aren't about what the people believe, but they're about why they believe it. So what I wanted to do was to try and find out from these people the road that they followed to get to the point that they're at, where they think they have the truth. And these people they all believe their truth so much that they go in the streets every day to spread their truth to everyone. And I was interested in this as well because these people in London are often marginalised, and people think that they're mad or at the best eccentric but probably insane. And I wanted to challenge people's perception of these people as outsiders, and I wanted to encourage people to see them as individuals who have just followed an understandable path. Now, it is true that these people are extreme examples of people who believe things, because they're out on the street spreading it all the time. But I hope that by watching the films, we can identify characteristics in these extreme people that we have in ourselves to a lesser degree. Anyway, the result, it took about 2.5 years, and the result was these 12 10-minute films. And what I hope is that when people watch them, it provokes them to consider themselves and their relationship with people who have faith, or perhaps more importantly, people who don't have faith. And that's what I hope they do. Anyway, I'm going to play 4 of the films for you now, and then, as I say, you can ask any questions that you'd like. Is it working? No?
No. We've got menu language English now.
Reggae.
It's gone now. LG again. Little DVD on the telly.
Is it working? Is it working?
Not yet. Hang on, don't do anything.
Is it black?
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Is it working? Where's the sound?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and when the Nazis came to power, they got hold of my father, and I forgot now how long they had hold of him, and I think after a while he was released again, and the Nazis thought he might help them in the agricultural enterprises, you know.
Paid you the money and now we want the land. And the promise said absolutely not. We haven't had a penny out of it. And so what the Jewish people from the Kibbutzim did, they went up the hill, which was a stony hill, they picked up stones as they went and they threw them at the Arabs, as the Arabs came to them. And when I heard the story, I was really horrified. I was only some weeks up in the Galilee, and then we got this bit of land, which was in Netanya, about the middle of the country. And I absolutely loved it. There was no money at all. Everybody worked. The work was rotated round, so that if you had a rotten job about cleaning the lavatories, everybody did it. And everybody cooked, everybody looked after the kids, everybody went out to work, everybody does, cruising things to work. And it was so
That's the end of the first 4 films. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
So Duncan, why did you not tell us very clearly what people does?
Doing what they believe.
Yes.
I don't think it was important. Let's start again. Let's stop. Thomas, I didn't think it was important. I mean, what the people believe is what they say on the streets every day. But in terms of what I was interested in, that didn't play a part in it. I was only interested in the route they followed to get there. So if it was about what they believed, it'd be a completely different group of films. Certainly because it wasn't my interest, it wasn't my priority.
So you all edited it out? I didn't understand the question.
Well, I
I
think
was asking if those people didn't tell him what they believed at all. So you edited it all out deliberately because they must have told you about it because you're in.
well, it's true. I think some of the people when they agreed to let me interview them, they thought it would be like a platform for their belief. But the questions I asked weren't ever really about what they believe. I didn't say what makes you think this. I was asking simple questions about, where they were from, what they did at school, things like that. So the questions I asked didn't really encourage them to speak about it. But yeah, some of the things you can see what they believe, but it's only an instant. It's not a deliberate thing to say this is what they believe and this is what they believe. If they talk about it, it's only just an accident that's why it happens. It was never a plan.
There's something when I'm watching. I'm really interested in the reasons of what they believe in and what you're suggesting. There's a bit of me that's just thinking, I wonder what it is.
Really? I don't know. I mean,
especially with the first one, not the other side, but the first one.
Well, I think perhaps if I said at the beginning of each one, this person's a communist or this person's a whatever, that might be a distraction because then you might think that the film is a premise to explain why they became a communist or why they became a Buddhist or whatever they became. Whereas really, the point is for me, the only interesting thing is that they believe something very strongly and what they believe isn't important. So maybe that would be a distraction if you said that what they believe.
I haven't seen the film, sorry.
Okay.
But, I have been reading the book The Believers.
Which book?
The Zoe Hera
Okay.
new book. Yeah, so and then I saw that. So I saw that The Believers. So I thought that you have some inspiration from her book or something.
No, I have no connection with Zoe Heller at all.
So you haven't read the book?
I haven't read the book, no.
It is very interesting also.
Oh, is it?
Yes. I
Thank you.
found.
I'll look for it.
Yeah, because what you explain about your work, I heard now, it's relate to also what you believe and then what you failed
Oh,
also
really?
as a believers. Yeah.
I'll look at it. I'll look at it. What? What is it?
For itself.
Is it? Should I turn it off?
No, it's not this one.
The problem is solved.
Oh, okay. If nobody's got any more questions, I can put some more films on for you to watch if you want to. Oh, yes. Hi.
If you look at it for the first time, I think it is nice. It looks like a little biography of the people.
Yes.
I don't know if that was the meaning, but it seems the similarity in the movies.
I'm sorry, I can't.
It looks like a little biography of the people's life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of, eh?
Yeah, like small biographies,
Yeah.
about these people who believe they have the truth, yeah.
Yeah, I find it very nice when they were just on the street, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, there's simple people on the street selling papers, and then there's a whole life story behind it, you know? That's what I find very nice, and it's a valuable thing, their, you know, their history, what they went through.
Thank you, I think so. I mean, you know, 'cause you see these people on the street
Yeah.
and you think that they're,
Very,
they're mad or they're,
yeah.
you know, and so
Yeah, they have
there's very human reasons why they do what they do.
yeah,
I think that
yeah. I found it very clear out of the movie. Yeah.
Thank you.
When with the first one, I would say, for example, the last one.
First one.
Diane.
Yeah.
When you were talking, the last one felt very compassionate. She felt like a very compassionate human being.
The lady, the South
Yeah.
African lady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She felt like a very compassionate human being. But the first one seemed to be motivated by a lot of hatred, actually. Did you get a sense of that when you were talking to her?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know,
Aversion, if not hatred.
I tried not to make any judgment about the people, but I did feel that Diane Hamilton, the sort of, she doesn't really have a structured belief. She's hates a lot of things, and I think she blames her position on a lot of different things. But I don't know. Yeah, that's just my perception. You know, that's. But yeah, I think she didn't really have a clear, structured set of beliefs that she tried to spread. She'd just go and she'd say, black people shouldn't be here, Indian people shouldn't be here, I should be here because I'm white. So I think
what you said?
it was more or less, I think, as I understood, that was about her. But yeah, so I think for her, her belief was perhaps a way to compensate for all the things that she didn't think she had. I mean, she lived in a little tiny room by herself in London, in a house full of students, and she was a very unhappy woman. But you know, that's just my perception. You know.
That was my impression. That was why it was so mistake, not even to understand her belief, because maybe you tried to cut it out because you thought it was kind of a negative.
I didn't consciously. She didn't have a platform. She didn't have. You know, most people here that they have a structured belief system which they try and spread. But she didn't really. She would stand and she would criticise people, but without really. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think she would be able to say, I am a whatever it is. I think, yeah, she'd say, yeah, I think this.
So, but why did you decide to include her truth in her little movie?
Because she's in this group of people all the time, so she must believe she has some sort of truth to spread. But it wasn't clear to me what it was. But it's not really important to me what it is. The important thing is she feels something so strongly that she goes every day to try and share it with people.
Were these 4 movies made chronologically as we saw them? Was it the first movie that you made?
You know what? I can't remember. There's no in the order here. There's no particular significance. But I can't remember who was first of those people. Hi.
How did they like this film, this movie themselves? How did they like it themselves, the movie, when they saw
They didn't. I didn't automatically offer to show them the films. Some people did see them. The last woman, the South African woman, did, and she liked it very much. But I didn't. It's difficult because if you say, you know, if I give it to someone, they say, oh, I don't like it, and it's a difficult position because I can't say, oh, well, okay, well, I'll change it.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I don't say to them, hey, it's okay, look, here's your film. If you don't like it, tell me. But if they did ask to see it, I did give it to them. But you know, it wasn't a matter of practice. Should I put another disc on top?
Yes. More questions?
Sorry, Hans.
No, I want to thank you, but I'm awfully sorry I have to leave.
Okay, Hans. Thank you for coming.
Yeah. Can you send me free?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Is it working?
And my dad phoned up my brother and said to him, get him married up. Find him a wife. Because he needs a wife because he's got children. So I found this beautiful Indian girl, practicing. She was covering. I didn't like the covering at that time, but she was covering, she was beautiful, she was young. She was 10 years younger than me. She liked me, I liked her. I thought, yeah, that's good. She was a virgin. Can't be bad, you know what I mean? I said, well, what goes your uncle? Let's get on with it.
Remember, don't argue the rules. The rules have been set, not taken for exchange. You can't argue the reparations laws if you're the part of the subject. So there'll be a sinner, someone, you rule the word, there'll be a sinner. Martin Luther King is a leader. He's a man that's a leader. And his wife will make him happen. Here we are, the old YouTubers in our lives today, so there'll be a sinner.
My wife has never become a Christian in all them years. The kids have, but my wife hasn't.
Kids, you know, with my toys, and I heard them arguing, really screaming, breaking things, and I was just like, I just ran inside, you know, and stood between them, and you know, started screaming, stop, 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 like that. So this is one of my kind of oldest memories of family life. And so yeah, it wasn't so nice. Then later I found out that actually this wasn't my real father, that it was my adoptive father, and that actually my mother had left my real father, and it was about
Well, I was born in Ilford, in my mother's bed, in 1934, the youngest of 3 children. Michael was 9 years older than me. I very much admired him because he was one of the best welterweights in the country. He trained me as a boxer. And Peter was 4 years older than me. He was very quiet, very scholarly, and he and I used to fight sometimes. We were always enemies when we were boys. They both died in their early middle years, and we were so violent.
Okay, let's start with this lecture on. This is the 8th lecture at the Bijlmer Spinoza Festival, and as you know, there will be the whole 50 lectures, and the title of this lecture today is the subject of art. So, in this lecture, I want to give a definition of what art is, what is an artwork, what is art, what is the relation between art and philosophy, and what is, does, as I believe, a kind of friendship exists between philosophy and art. Can you hear me? The first thing I believe in is that art is something else than only documentation. So there's a kind of tendency in contemporary art, reducing art to a kind of reflection of its own time. And we all know that the production of art, the making of art is already, it happens already in a kind of hyper-codified or hyper-determined reality. Hyper-determined, that means socially or culturally or politically or economically hyper-determined reality. So this reality field or this context in which the art production is made is not innocent. It's not an empty field. It's already constituted, and in this sense, over-determined reality space we share. This is the space of communication, of information, the social sphere, if you want, the symbolic order in Lacanian terms. And the question is, what is the relation between an artwork and its field, and the field of its own conditions? And I don't think that an artwork is nothing but a document of its own time, a document of its own conditions. So there's a kind of in the very structure of an artwork, there's a kind of excess or transcendence towards its own field, towards the own field of, or concerning the field of its own conditions. I think art is much more than a documentation of its own time, a documentation of its own conditions, an assertion of something that is that doesn't appear in this established field of established realities, in this texture of facts, and I call this blind spot of the constituted or officialized reality, I call it the incommensurability. Incommensurability, or in the terms of other philosophers, the outside or the exterior, or the chaos, or truth, the point of truth or dimension of truth. And the definition of truth that I present here is truth is precisely that which does not exist in the established field of existing realities. So art is not only a confrontation of its own time, a confrontation of its own conditions, confrontation of its of the fact, of the simple fact already being contextualized by this field of established reality. Of course, it is also this. We have to be aware about this, that making art and today means making art today, under the conditions of today in this cultural field, under the conditions of this, under the conditions of this under the conditions of reality, how it is established in all these different orders, like concerning his economic side, concerning his concerning the market, of course, and concerning the over-politicization of art, for example, today. And I think, of course, for not being too naive, it's very important to confront all these conditions, to be aware about these conditions. But the definition of art that I want to present is something more, something else. The artwork is something more, something else, something different than only a reflection on its own conditions. It has much more to do with getting in contact and with this dimension of the exterior, or the dimension of incommensurability. That means with everything that is excluded out of the field of established reality, that has no representation in the field of established reality. So I would say the first definition of art that I want to present today is that art is a kind of assertion of form, assertion of form, or affirmation of form. So art has to do with form, but this to invent a new form, or to affirm a new form, or to assert a new form, means of course to be in contact and with the very limit of the reality system. That means with the implicit inconsistency of this consistency field that I call the texture of facts. So an artwork is already as artwork, as this form that he represents, or that he is, opened up to the dimension of the namelessness, if you want, the dimension of the new, of the dimension of the exterior, or the dimension of incommensurability as such. And here I find a kind of here's the point where the friendship between philosophy and art can be shown, because I think philosophy is the same. Thinking is being opened up to the dimension of the exterior, giving form by language, normally in philosophy. So the philosopher also is dealing, of course, with form, but the form of philosophy is to invent a new language that means a new style, a new form of speaking and of writing, of course. And I think I don't believe so much in the differences between philosophy and art, because I think from the more formalistic point of view, art and philosophy, they share specifically this, being opened up to the dimension of the nameless, to the dimension of the faceless, to the dimension of the exterior, or to the dimension of something that has no representation already, no representation until now in the field of established realities and this kind of textual facts. So what is the ontological structure of an artwork? It's precisely this, being opened up. So the artwork is on the very border between this reality field on the one side, and the other side, this is the order of incommensurability. But this order of incommensurability doesn't mean that there is a second world, another reality, a higher reality, something like this, in a kind of metaphysical sense, a higher reality, and that the artwork, that would be a kind of idealistic concept of art, to believe in the existence of a second world, and then the dynamics of the artwork would be simply to leave the field of constituted realities, the here and now of constituted realities, to get in touch with a higher truth. When I say truth, I precisely mean the non-existence of a second world, the non-existence of a second reality. So truth is nothing but the name for the inconsistency point of this consistency system, that is this field of established realities, of these officialized realities. And so there's no second world, and it's not a question to flee this one world, the here and now, into a higher reality by doing art, by thinking, by making philosophy, but it's much more to confront the here and now, but to confront it like this, confronting the incommensurable parts of the here and now field, the incommensurable parts of the excluded parts, the non-represented parts of this representation field that I call reality. So there's only one world. There's only the here and now, this hyper-codified here and now, our shared reality. And in this here and now, this here and now, or this dimension of the here and now, or this dimension of the constituted reality is the field in which the art production necessarily happens and has to happen. So first, I think there's a double confrontation concerning art. First, you have to confront the fact being already determined by social facts, by political facts, by economical facts, and so on. But the second step, of course, and for me in a way, the more important step is not to accept the assimilation of art to that field, not to assimilate yourself also as a philosopher in your thinking to the field of established thinking. That means, of course, also not to assimilate yourself in thinking or in the production of art to the dimension of the past, to the tradition. And I think a real artist is someone who doesn't only inscribes itself in the field of, in the history of art, simply like this, just making a new artwork and putting it in the framework of an already existing concept of art. But I think a real artist, or an artist that I would call an artist that I would be interested in, or I'm interested in, is an artist that invents his own concept of art. So he is in a way inventing its own concept of art, like each philosopher is inventing its own concept of philosophy. So to give some examples in the history of philosophy, it's totally clear that Plato, for example, at the beginning of modern or European philosophy, the Occidental tradition of philosophy, Plato invents his concept of philosophy as anamnesis in Old Greek words. Anamnesis, that means as remembering the status of the human psyche before being incarnated in the body, and being in a kind of direct contact to this kind of, to the ideas, like Plato calls it, to the idea, for example, of the human being, or to the idea of what beauty is, or what justice is, and so on. And I don't believe at all in this kind of regressive concept of philosophy. Philosophy being in touch with a kind of origin, or being in touch with a reality that makes part of the past of the human being as non-incarnated psyche. Then, of course, to give another example concerning the history of philosophy. Concerning, for example, the concept of philosophy in Kant is totally different than the concept of philosophy in Heidegger. So, or the concept of philosophy in René Descartes, who marks a little bit the starting point of modern philosophy concerning the Occidental tradition of philosophy. That means by inventing the ego cogito, by the interpretation of the human being as ego cogito, as res cogitans, as a being or a thing or an object able to think. And to invent an object that is able to think means, of course, to invent the subject itself. And Descartes was the philosopher who invented the concept of philosophy that had to do with the kind of with the invention of this modern concept of subjectivity, by addressing the human being as a subject of thinking, as res cogitans. And so that is again something totally different than the Platonic gesture of anamnesis and remembering. In concerning contemporary art, or let's say the art of the last 100 years, it's totally obvious that the concept of art that, for example, Marcel Duchamp invented with its ready-mades, and or the concept of art that Joseph Beuys invented with the social sculpture, or the concept of art that Andy Warhol invented with the idea of with his series and seriality, and that each of these artists is a strong artist because he invents its own concept of art. Then finally he's inscribed in the field of the history of art. But I think it's more important than this aspect, not being able to avoid being finally inscribed in that field of art, or in the field of the affiliation that is the history of art or the history of philosophy. Much more important is, of course, the moment, this kind of breakthrough moment in which an artist, and that is the moment of creatio, of creation, of course, that is the moment in which the artist, by inventing, while doing art, while producing artworks, inventing its own concept of art in relation to already existing history and already existing concept of art. So the very condition of art production is, in my interpretation, to get in conflict with the already existing concept of art. And I think that is how you can define a strong position concerning art. Just finding out what is what is the conflict between this artist, this artistic position, and the concept of art that was established at the time in which the artist formulated this position. And I think it's the same with philosophy. So there's a kind of excess structure concerning the artwork, and the excess structure is precisely this: that with producing art, with making an artwork, the artist refuses the assimilation, the self-assimilation to its own conditions, to its own reality field, to its own cultural field. So that's why it becomes very important to make the difference between culture and art, for example, because culture is nothing but established art production, established or officialized, already accepted, already integrated art production, or but the real moment of art is, of course, not the self-inscription in that field of culture, but it's much more the conflict, the resistance towards this culture. So I would say one first aspect or moment of the artwork is to open up first to the dimension of constituted culture, to the dimension of constituted reality, but with the goal, of course, while refusing this self-assimilation to this field. So the first ontological structure of the artwork, I would say, is this kind of resistance towards its own here and now. It's this field of conditions, and to avoid, of course, the kind of metaphysical or illusionary naivete. I don't. It's important, of course, to insist that the invention of something new already or always happens and can only be able in the field of constituted reality. So in the direct confrontation with that field, while resisting to that field. So that's what I would call the resistance character of the artwork, or if you want, also the conflictuous character of the artwork. So an artwork is always fighting against its own conditions. Then the question, of course, is for what? And for what, that means everyone knows it, and me too as a philosopher, for example, while writing a text, when I have to write a text, I have an idea in my mind what this text should be about. Sometimes I have a title, and I have an idea what I want to write and what I want to formulate, and then finally, I start writing, and then the result is totally different than I expected. And I think this experience that of a kind of blind flight, this experience of being blinded by its own experience, by the experience while writing, while producing, makes part of the production of art too. So, of course, you can clarify your ideas before. You can, but I think I really believe in that art has to be in conflict also with the knowledge of the artist, with the knowledge status of the artist. So, in a way, it's always a kind of transgression of knowledge. like it's transgression of the field of constituted realities. And so I believe in this kind of blindness or helplessness or the kind of self-acceleration of the movement of creation, the movement of writing in philosophy, the movement of thinking. So it's always a little bit over hasty, always a little bit too fast. And if it wouldn't be like this, the invention of something new wouldn't be, or the formulation of something new wouldn't be possible. So the invention of something new is new for the artist too, because it brings him to, it lets him make an experience that is not in a way that is uncontrollable. And that has nothing to do with kind of artistic heroism or something like this, but I think it's nothing but the everyday experience of each artist in production, being confronted with its own non-knowledge, and that means being opened up and making the affirmation of this by defining its artwork as the manifestation of this affirmation, the affirmation of this blind flight towards the dimension of the uncontrollable, or towards the dimension of incommensurability, like I call it, or towards the dimension of this kind of this blind field, or not yet existing reality. So making art, producing, inventing something new, inventing a new form, the assertion of a new form in art, or the assertion of a truth, that means of the limit of the established reality field, demands from the subject of art or subject of thinking to get in contact with its own incapacities, with its own impotency, if you want. So can be kind of strong experience to accept that you can't develop an artwork, you can't develop writing just by in that kind of secured field of established consistencies, but you have to accept that this consistency field is nothing but a kind of illusion. And I would connect this to the philosophy of Jacques Lacan, the French psychanalyst and philosopher Jacques Lacan, who insisted precisely on this, that reality is in itself an illusion of course that works, an illusion that has a kind of truth status. It works, it functions, and I would say reality is precisely the dimension in which the human subject works, in which the human subject functions, in which the human subject is dealing with its possibilities, with its capacities. But to make art, or the experience of art, the experience of thinking, of philosophy, has much more to do to get in contact with the inconsistency or the incommensurability, the incommensurable parts of established reality, and that means to discover reality as this consistency field, as inconsistency as such. So reality has its own inconsistencies, and of course that makes part of the, if you want, the character of the artwork as the affirmation of a kind of emancipation. Emancipation from what? Emancipation from that established field, from the so-called certainties. And there's a difference in philosophy between truth and certainty. And Descartes, who I mentioned before, is, as the philosopher who opened up this space of modern philosophy, of modern thinking, Descartes is the philosopher who, of certainties, who tried to give to the human subject, to human thinking, a kind of fundament, a fundament from which the thinking or philosophy could build up a kind of stable architecture. And this search for a kind of fundamentum inconcussum in Descartes is a very character, in a way, very typical for modern philosophy, for the philosophy, if you want, between Descartes and the beginning of the 20th century. And the philosophy of the 20th century became to be more and more suspicious concerning the possibility of self-fundamentation, of this modern gesture of the human subject in philosophy to ground your thinking yourself, to stabilize you by deploring or a kind of stable fundament. And I think there's something again that art and philosophy share in the 20th century, and that is the acceptance that this fundament doesn't exist, that this stable ground doesn't exist. And you know that in philosophy, Nietzsche's, everyone knows this famous sentence of Nietzsche, and the sense of it, God is dead. And later Lacan said the symbolic order, the le grand autre, or the big other, that means this consistency field I speak about, reality, does not exist. That is his version of Nietzsche's sentence of the death of God. And what does it mean? Finally, it means the freedom is absolute. Like Sartre called it, the freedom of the human being is absolute. That means the human subject is condemned to be free. It's condemned to invent itself as a subject in this field of institutionalized objectivities or certainties or evidences or opinions, because the field of established reality is of course the field in which a lot of opinions, a lot of evidences, a lot of so-called certainties are circulating, and they constitute this field of consistency, like I call it, this texture of fact, and to think in a way, or to invent yourself as a subject of thinking, or to invent yourself as a subject of art, to make art or to make philosophy means to transgress this field of consistencies by accepting, by affirming the incommensurability status of the subject as such, the subject as already being opened up to the dimension of subject closure. That means to the dimension of the chaos, or to the dimension of the nameless, or to the dimension of the becoming, like Nietzsche and Deleuze and Guattari later called it. And so it has to do with an affirmation of not being totally defined yet, not being a subject that is that would be a kind of narcissistic phantasm, to believe in that there is a kind of stable identity of the human subject. But I would insist, after the deconstruction of this category in the philosophy of, for example, Jacques Derrida, or also in a way, he does not use this word, this deconstruction, of course, Gilles Deleuze, but the philosophy of post-structuralism, like it's called, the second half of the philosophy in the second half of the philosophy of the 20th century. After the deconstruction of the subject, there remains a kind of subject. What kind of subject is it? I would insist on that this subject already always existed. It existed through the whole history of philosophy as the scene of its permanent self-deconstruction. So the deconstruction of the subject doesn't mean to leave the subject, the category of the subject. It doesn't mean to deny that a kind of freedom, a kind of autonomy exists. I would say there is autonomy, but there is autonomy in the here and now of over-determined reality, and that's why autonomy is so important. Or that's why it's so important to insist on the necessity of freedom, or the possibility of being free, because there's freedom only in this field of objective unfreedom that I call the reality space, or the texture of facts. And that's the same structure, like I said, like I called it before, like I defined it before. There's freedom only in objective unfreedom. That means concerning the production of art, or thinking, philosophical thinking, if you want, or the self-invention of the subject in the field of objective unfreedom. That is, of course, the field in which he appears, this human subject appears as an object for the others, as an object objects that not necessarily made part of the order of human being. And because the subject has to articulate itself in this established field of objective unfreedom, it became so necessary to redefine the concept of freedom, to redefine the concept of autonomy in relation to the idealistic tradition, to the deconstructivist tradition, that, if you want, to redefine it in relation to the tradition also of German idealism, the philosophy of Kant and Fichte and Schelling and Hegel and so on. And I think, as I believe in art and philosophy as a kind of being in touch with your own freedom to be free. We are here in at the Spinoza festival, and I think that's what we can learn by Spinoza, that freedom is not the freedom of the will, and freedom does not mean being able to do everything that I want to do. That's not, that would be a very reduced and childish concept of freedom, but freedom in a more complex and a more definition means, freedom means to stay in contact with the irreducible necessities. So to open up to the dimension of these necessities, that means to open up finally again to the dimension of the incommensurable, or to the dimension of the uncontrollable. So there's always something that, how do you say in English, evades or escapes my own thinking, my own power, my own knowledge. So it's not a question to deny this, it's a question to confront it, and to confront my own defect, not being a subject of absolute knowledge in a kind of Hegelian sense, but being a subject of a reduced knowledge, means already to be free, because to put me free in relation to what takes my freedom off, and that would be the concept of freedom that I would like to affirm, and I would define the production of art, or the making of art, or thinking, philosophical thinking, as this blind affirmation, this necessary blind affirmation of this affirmation of being already touched by the uncontrollable itself. Okay, that's the statement for today, and thank you.
No question.